This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Labor Beat Radio, broadcasting here on Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, with my good buddy and longtime pal here, JB Christensen, and usually Scott Marshall, but from Chicago, but he might be out today. And we have as a special guest this morning, Troy Miller, and local Eastern Panhandle Center Labor Council endorsed candidate for House of Delegates, who was running from a difficult district, in this respect, but nonetheless put forward a heroic battle, and for which we commend him. And now I understand he's agreed to hang in and help the Democratic leadership in Jefferson County push forward too, and not crawl under a rock anywhere. Some things like some people are doing under this torrent of some call it fascism, some call here comes Scott, some call it something worse, something like something that the other side of God's lower brother, created, something like that. But anyway, Troy, welcome to the program. And JB, you got anything else you want to say about introductions for Troy Miller? Hey, Scott, welcome to the program.
Yeah.
Well,
All
one
right.
thing, good morning, Scott. It's good to see you, brother.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
I know it's probably a little bit chillier up there in Chicago.
Well, it's getting warmer.
Yeah, today we're supposed to hit the 70s.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But Troy has been we're talking about Troy Miller, who's our guest today, and he's one of our endorsed candidates in the last election. And unfortunately, he fell short. But John mentioned it is a very tough district that's been dominated by the Republicans for many, many cycles. It's going to take a lot to win that district. You need a lot of time and effort and money. We tried to help him out, but wasn't quite enough. And now we're stuck with this disaster, chaotic economy, and we call it the Trump session. We put Trump right in the front of it because he caused it. And I think that's a good start off, a good discussion to start with, and everybody's feelings about what's going on in the stock market and, just overall malaise that is encompassing most of the progressive movement, other than the protests we see all across the country every day. Every day, the women, the government workers, the union members, you name it, everybody's fighting. So that's a good place to start today. I think something's got to give. There's all kinds of songs about that, and Troy's an accomplished musician as well, and I'm sure there's many songs that kind of describe what's going on here, and how we're feeling about it. But I'll start off with that. And it's good to see everybody.
All right, Troy, give him hell. What's going on, man? From your purse,
well,
okay?
I'll start off by saying it does have a real Buffalo Springfield vibe every morning. For what it's worth, there's something happening here.
Right.
What it ain't exactly clear, but from the side of the billionaires and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, there's I see it as basically they're greedy. They're going to steal as much as possible, as much as we let them do. And for them, that means Social Security is one of the first things that they go for, because that's a trillion-dollar trust fund that they'd really prefer if Wall Street could manage, or if you had to invest in Elon Musk's cryptocurrency or something like this. But I have been really kind of, for the last week or two, really marveling at the abject cruelty that's required for them to not only go after people's Social Security, but also then crash everyone's 401ks and retirements also on that front too. Is just, the jig is up, the idea that these people are savvy economic operators, that they understand economics better than the rest of us. The reality is they understand business, and they're going to run this country like a business. In particularly, they're running it like a private equity business, and they're stripping us for assets. And all you have to know is to look at Sears and Toys R Us and Bed Bath and Beyond and all of these stores that used to exist before private equity took them over and ran them like a business. So that's sort of my initial thoughts on today, at this particular moment in time. And in 10 minutes, I'm sure we're on the verge of another trade war, or some more tariffs are going to be announced or repealed, or any number of things will happen before I finish the end of this sentence. But I think it's really important that we all stay focused on following the money and so your thoughts.
Come on, baby.
Oh, John, you're muted still.
Yeah.
There we go.
Now I'm better. Now, okay. I think the hardest question immediate question is whether or not the economic chaos is going to generate a recession. And of course, it's going to be difficult for it not to, it's going to be easier to go into one than to avoid it. And it looks a little bit like, I saw several Bloomberg analysts, this morning, saying that it was really a trick to make it easier to pass the gigantic tax cut that Trump wants has promised all the billionaires. Okay. And in order to do that, of course, if you could trigger a recession, well, then, cutting taxes for the rich would be arguably increasing investment, blah, 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 blah. And, then they would be under the gun, and Congress would be more likely to quickly, rather than debate forever, extending, the big tax cuts. And the other, what you say is like the phony part, the part that really has almost, very far-fetched credibility is I'm going to pay for the tax cuts by the tariffs, which is, who's going to pay the tariffs? Okay, well, unless the dollar just continues up infinitely, and even if it does, actually, given all the countermeasures, the American people are going to pay it just like sales tax.
Right.
That's what's going to happen.
Which is inflationary, right? Tariffs are inflationary by their nature because they raise the price of things, right?
But
then what they keep on saying from the Republican side and from the conservative side is that if we raise the minimum wage for workers, right, that would cause inflation and that would drive a recession. If you give $600 stimulus checks at the point of a pandemic, then that causes inflation for the next 3 years, according to them. But if we give billions of dollars of tax breaks to people with billions of dollars, that's somehow not inflationary. And the only thing I'll say is that there's something to that, because when billionaires get tax breaks, I know the myth is that they're supposed to return that into investment and all of that, but that's not how they stay billionaires, right? They offshore a lot of that. They buy a storage unit in Singapore or Thailand, and they buy up a lot of art that no one will ever look at, and they store it there because that's a part of it. And then they get a yacht and they store all that. That's part of their game as billionaires that none of us will ever be. Maybe I really hope, John, that you get so well off here that you have to worry about how you spend your billions of dollars. But I don't think any of us are going to have that concern. The vast majority of people in America, the vast majority of West Virginians aren't going to have that concern. And one thing I keep on going back to, Representative Al Green saying you don't have a mandate to cut Medicaid. That's true. But more than that, here in West Virginia, when you start adding up the 1 out of 3 West Virginians who depend on Medicaid, the 1 out of 4 West Virginians who are getting their earned Social Security benefits, I'm trying to think about what the numbers are. I don't have them right in front of me. But you start adding up these numbers: Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, WIC, all of these benefits, and it is far more West Virginians who receive these benefits. They're earned benefits. Let's be very clear. I'm not going to brook any talk about entitlements. these are earned benefits, then voted for Donald Trump in this state, then voted for any of this, right? When you actually break down the numbers, you're looking at maybe 30, if you're really generous, 35% of all West Virginians voted for Donald Trump, right? Now, if you're just looking at registered voters who turned out, that number jumps up to 70%, which is the number that they always talk about top line. Now, and people have told me that I'm picking nits here by saying, oh, it's not really 70%, it's only 30%. But that makes a difference when you're talking about who's going to be hurt by the cuts and that this administration is promoting as a way to pay for their tax cuts for billionaires, which does actually start coming up to 50, 60% of West Virginians who will be harmed directly. And that's before you start adding in employees who are laid off and what's happening at the state level, which you and JB know much more about because you were just down there in Charleston.
Right.
I have to follow it from back here and try to guess what's going to make it out of committee and what's a real threat, and that's half the game here. But again, I could keep talking forever. You know this.
I mean, we talked to I think 4 different Republicans. Okay, one of whom has always been friendly to us and was no problem. The other used to be friendly to us, changed parties, and he said he was with us, but he doesn't always tell the truth. And then another one, I think, is with us on the issue, for example, of the state of PEIA. But on a number of others is just a whack job, frankly. And then we have, what's his name, Rittenhour, who's just, in my view, should be in prison. But, anyway, so I mean, he's a piece of work. He doesn't give a shit about employees or West Virginia, not a bit. And so
you're killing me, John.
To hell with him. But so that was our 1 out of 4 that you could trust would be with you. The others, I think, go into that category. They might sympathize with you, but if someone puts a lid on them or puts a thumb on them, they're going to vote with them the way they're supposed to. So it was a disheartening experience. And the question of what to do about it. I mean, you got to be careful about something. For example, how can you deal with the education system? Okay, I mean, I don't think there's any way to deal with it except through taxing the natural resources of the state. I just listened to an unbelievable program on David Rubenstein's interviewing the guy that runs the Norway's sovereign wealth fund and how it came into being. And he came out of private equity to run it. So they take 25% of all the earnings out of North Sea oil and invest it in, the government's program of education, diversification, like that. But they do that because they basically took it over, and they only privatized part of it to operate of it, but the rest of it, it's like they halfway nationalized it, okay, and are using it to transform the state with the only real asset that they had. And that's very similar to our situation. I don't see how you're going to get environmental programs and diversification and a workforce that's suitable for the 21st and second century, without taking that money and investing it in the people. Exactly. And by the way, that doesn't mean you can shut it down, because if you shut it all down, well, then I don't know what money you have at all. You have none. So.
Well, and I think beyond that, there's more accountability when you have it, let's say, semi-nationalized or semi-publicly operated. The state isn't going to be able to declare bankruptcy and leave the federal government on the hook for the Superfund sites like we've seen so often in West Virginia. I mean, there is a lot to be said, and it frustrates me, the dickens out of me, about when Democrats were in control of this state, what wasn't done to set us up for to meet the present moment. And for instance, one of the things that many people don't realize, but and when I've run the numbers is true, most of the coal jobs in West Virginia were lost in the 70s and 80s. They were lost before H.W. Bush left office and have nothing to do with environmental regulations and have everything to do with a preference towards automation and the rise of surface mining operations, which require far fewer people to run the operations. Okay, well, if we're going to be putting out people out of work permanently in large swaths of West Virginia, then it seems to me that there's some sense to be had to be collecting the severance taxes at a higher rate than they're collecting it now, and then reinvesting it to make sure that, like, you know, people don't have to don't have to take the old hillbilly highway and move up to Chicago or Minneapolis as they did so often in the 70s and 80s. That's, you know, but that would require an actual interest in the people of West Virginia, which is not what has backed the state of West Virginia over the years. It's the interests of Wall Street and the interests of out-of-state resource owners have been prioritized, and the people be damned. I mean, I wrote an essay a number of years ago, and I share it almost once a month at this point, talking about why coal barons don't support immigration like they used to. You know, at one point in West Virginia's history, there was a position that was a state position paid for entirely by the coal companies, and the guy's job was just to go out and recruit basically desperate people in Europe, in Hungary and Italy, and places where there were mining communities, but the economies had collapsed after World War I. Or going to the cities and finding people who were put out of work during the seasonal changes in the cities, because coal mining was significantly less seasonal work. And all of that is just to break the unions, right? This isn't out of some, right? There's no other motive there than to break the solidarity in the camps that's causing them to not make as much money, because when you have to pay a fair wage, when the workers are able to judge their own scales and you're not literally tipping the scales as the owner, when you can't work people 60 hours a week, which executive was that who just said that's the optimal level of productivity? Which, of course, if you're the executive, that's the optimal level of productivity for your workers. Yes, more work, more hours, same pay. Yep,
and no overtime.
Productivity.
Yeah, no overtime.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of that is to say, there's the history of West Virginia has never been one that's been.
This meeting is being recorded.
Go ahead.
Okay,
that was my fault.
That was a fine place to pause anyway. But it's this is all to say that, you know, we as a state do have to be able, and I say this as a leader within the Democratic Party, or somewhat, you know, of a leader in the Democratic Party, we have to be able to take, you know, responsibility for the state of the state after the 20th century. I don't know if they get to hang that albatross around our neck for another decade or so, the way the Republicans have, with complete control of the state. But people know what the Democratic Party failed to deliver for them in West Virginia. And if the Democratic Party doesn't acknowledge that in some way and then present, and I think this gets to the bigger question of what do we do in this moment, and then present a coherent alternative vision, which I've been proud to promote, this 21st century economic Bill of Rights, which was adopted unanimously by the West Virginia Democratic State Executive Committee and is part of the West Virginia Democratic platform right now, which is great. But we need more people talking about it. We need people identifying the legislation that helps bring about these goals. It's one thing to say, we believe everybody deserves safe, affordable, and decent housing. It's another thing to introduce legislation that starts working us there. And that's, I think, what we would, you know, in my perfect world, we would have an equivalence on, let's say, the left, but I would just pro-working class equivalence of the American Legislative Exchange Council for policies that work for working people. You know, and I'll believe that there's a good billionaire on our side out there when they drop $100 million on that think tank so that we can start promoting our own legislation across the country. In the meantime, I guess it's on us to, you know, and I'm not a lawyer, so it gets a little bit tedious right away. How do you change West Virginia state code to be promoting this economic bill of rights with every piece of legislation? I don't know, but it's sure as hell possible. Every time I hear our Democratic leadership, as scant as they are in Charleston, and they are small but mighty, I hear them talk about healthcare and education and the things that they're focusing on: good paying jobs, privacy for West Virginians. And I just want more of them to go, and this helps secure your right to civic participation as laid out in the Economic Bill of Rights. And this helps secure, right? And just always tie it back to that, because my sense is, as my post-mortem in my election and all of this, as people have talked to me, people who consider themselves to the right of me in the Democratic Party all told me, look, the Democrats are too woke nationally. We're never going to be able to get rid of that albatross. What if we just started, one of our delegates was formerly a Democrat, right? What if we just became a Republican, and then we might have an electoral chance, and then or what if we just ran as an independent? And then people who consider themselves more progressive or to the left of me would say, hey, the Democratic Party is seized by corporate billionaires. They're never going to support the things that we need to support in terms of pro-union, pro-working class, all of this stuff. So what if we just ran an independent campaign like Dan Osborne? And after I heard about 4 or 5 of these conversations, both sides, it occurred to me that the problem here is that the Democratic Party is whatever anybody hates, even within our own party. If you're on one side of it, you think the party is too far on the other side. And that tells me that we are not telling a coherent story as a party. And that's where I think the Economic Bill of Rights really
all right. Well, okay. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit here.
Please.
Now, before the Civil War, I think there was the Democratic Republican Party and the Whigs primarily. If you go 5 or 6 years before it, right? So I'm trying to keep my Oxford University history straight here a little bit. The Democratic Republican Party, I think it was called earlier, it was Jefferson's vehicle.
Yep.
And we evolved through a number of different combinations. However, when it came close to the divisions over slavery, the slave system, and the rising industrial capitalist system, and issues of what was democracy and what was not, states' rights versus federal unions, all these things sort of conspired to make it impossible for these political parties to make a bargain. In Congress, and the divisive interests now are not the same as those then, although everything has a history.
Yes.
And so they're not the same, but they are showing signs of the same kind of, you can't go back to what it was, divergence. You have to go up to something very different, or something substantially different, and it has a lot of different angles to it. Just like the approach to the Civil War looked like it had many different angles to it. Okay, and it's difficult for us to know how to rebuild the Democratic Party. Suppose you rebuild the Democratic Party as anti-Trump in a very profound way. Okay, in other words, Trump is not part of a democracy. Suppose you make that assumption, you start to think like that. Well, now you have 2 different parties that can't make a bargain either, okay? And one has to crush the other. And as we found out after the Civil War, we defeated it, but it didn't completely die. But we did reach a new equilibrium over time that lasted, who gets a lifetime of equilibrium? In ancient times, nobody did ever. So I don't know. So how do you think about we're in a historical era. It's not just a tactical game.
Right.
How do you deal with that?
Well, and in that context, I think that, it's for people who don't know, I worked with Tom Hartman started in 2014, 2015. I've helped him write 8 books or so in the meantime since then. And so there's a certain level where what we're seeing happening has been totally predictable. And the magnitude, the speed, there's certain things that were a little more difficult to predict. But for instance, there's a book behind me called We've Got People by Ryan Grimm, from Jesse Jackson to AOC, The Rise of a Movement, something in the end of Big Money or something like that. And the first edition of the book, I was the managing editor on the book. The first edition of the book ends with a paragraph that's basically like, the worst case scenario isn't that a centrist like Biden wins in 2020 or that Trump wins in 2020. The worst case scenario is really that we have a candidate, we put up a presidency, and then the change that people are demanding is not, they don't experience it. And so we end up with either Trump or a worse fascist, somebody with an actual program. Because what we didn't have in 2016, what Trump didn't have, was a clue about how Washington worked. I mean, we were really, I say we as in working people, there is a huge benefit from his incompetence of finding people and the churn of his staff and all of this, and his inability to work with the Republicans, the Paul Ryan type Republicans and the Scott Walker type Republicans, who were the boogeymen back in 14 and 15, but they were James S. Crow, Esquire the Third. They're dressed up. It's not quite the same brutal Jim Crow as the 30s and 40s, but Scott Walker and Paul Ryan, their model of America is that sort of thing. What Trump did was show up, and people have memory hold this. It really freaks me out. There were 15 other presidential candidates who tried to defeat Trump, and they all lost handily in the Republican primary. And what we all seem to move on from is the fact that Trump is the id of the Republican Party. That's what we've learned, right? Like, he didn't have to take over that party. He showed up and started saying things out loud that people really liked. We're going to hurt that part. We're going to hurt those people because they're hurting you, right? And he started saying the myths out loud that Ronald Reagan was, a relatively pro-immigration and understood that Social Security had nothing to do with balancing a budget. Donald Trump doesn't understand any of that and doesn't care, because he cares about being popular. And so he's saying the things out loud that they weren't going to say before. In the historical context, just to really bring it back around, America's revolutionary idea is essentially that anybody can own property rights, and that the divine right of the king isn't how we manage our government, isn't how we manage our political and civic and economic affairs. That's really the radical revolutionary idea that started with John Locke and others, that manifested with the American Revolution and the Constitution. And it is a radical revolutionary idea. You can't undersell it. But there are two real main original sins that puts into America's DNA. One of them is the sort of praise of rock property accumulation, right? The other part is the idea that some human beings are property, which was codified in our Constitution. And more than that, if you own a bunch of those human beings, you get more vote, you get more political activity, you get more civic life than anybody else by virtue of owning all those human beings, because you're more propertied, right? And then that was unsustainable from its outset, because you had Virginia and Pennsylvania not viewing human beings as property in the same capacity, and slaves fleeing from where we're sitting right now in then Virginia across to Pennsylvania, and then causing constitutional crises like right away. They managed to kind of hobble it together until the Civil War. The Civil War, all of this factionalization, really, as I think you're starting to highlight, brought about by also the challenge of industrial capital, because slavery is not a capitalistic process. It is separate from capitalism. It can result in capital accumulation, but it's not a capitalist system in the same way that factory work and wage labor is, right?
Right.
There's these challenges and tensions that really that come to a head in the Civil War and then are reorganized. But then it's World War II that really redefines how the Great Depression and World War II that really forces us to confront that we had gone too far with the laissez-faire property rights capitalism, that we had interpreted the 14th Amendment in really obnoxious and really harmful ways unless you're a business owner, right? How you can interpret the 14th Amendment to be a freedom of contract that makes it so minimum wage laws are unconstitutional is beyond me, but that was the state of affairs for 40 years in the United States. And then with the New Deal and with the ability for us to which is amazing. Part of this is that we were so far, Germany had the first workers' compensation program in the 1880s. And I actually have like a speech from Bismarck that sits by my computer because Bismarck was such a flaming liberal that he was basically arguing that, you have to deal with old age security and all this. And America, 60 years later, catches up with the New Deal basically and really codifies and I'm going to use a word or a phrase that people it's become toxic, but built a welfare state that built the middle class that was the largest and richest middle class of the world has ever seen. And for 80 years, billionaires in business have wanted to dismantle those programs. And really since about 1973 is when Lewis Powell writes his infamous Powell memo and says business has to get political. We have to take on public education. We have to basically make real what the libertarian economist Milton Friedman had laid out, which is basically the state is only there to protect property. And now we are at a moment in historical time, and it's the old Chinese proverb. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but or curse. May you live in interesting times. we're there, and it's our job to realize that we're the adults in the room. Nobody's coming to save us. We have to get organized and defeat this. And unfortunately, Democratic leadership at the national level, and I see this at the state level too. There's Joe Manchin at the state level, right? He's the most senior person, no longer even a Democrat. And then there's nothing in terms of a bench. We're starting to get there. We have some great champions, Joey Garcia, Sean Hornbuckle, Kayla Young, all of these great. There's too few of them, and they're all younger. Like there should be somewhere some people between Jerry Connolly and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but we're just lacking it.
Yeah.
And so we have to meet the moment, and we have to figure out how to make the moment into a movement. And that's a great place for me to leave that rant.
Okay. All right. Well, Scotty, JB, what's your take on this discussion?
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. I have to apologize, Troy. I tried to vote for you, but they wouldn't let me. You know how. Yeah. Anyway, I actually think that the resistance is on the rise, and I think more and more people are understanding what's at stake here. And of course, Illinois, is a Democratic state supposedly, but everywhere I look, more and more people are saying I've had enough of this. And I don't want to have anything to do with this. And, the other thing that I think is interesting is that, with the Supreme Court the way it is, and that they think they can do anything they want. But even there, some of the stuff. Well, you look at the judges that have ruled against Trump in the since he's been in office, and it's pretty incredible that many people are challenging him like that. And I think that's a really important step forward. And I really believe that the progressive movement is getting stronger and stronger, and that we're going to be able to defeat this guy. I just see it. I see more and more people getting involved. And one of the things that I think is most interesting is how strong young people are in this fight. I mean, you go to any of these demonstrations, you go to any of these protests, and it's dominated in large part by really young people and young workers. And I feel like anyway, I really feel well, I hate the time we're in, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Are you bordering Canada?
No, but my electricity is still going skyrocket.
All right. Hey, JB.
Yeah, I thought that was great, Troy, and trying to summarize the craziness going on in the Democratic Party. But the irony is that we thought the Republican Party was the one that was being destroyed, that would destroy itself from within when, all the crazy campaign speeches and, Trump's ability to get into so much trouble, every time he opens his mouth. We thought for sure that they would self-destruct. Well, they didn't. And, it remains to be seen with the budget debate going on now. March 15th is coming very soon. If they decide to shut down the government or not, that's going to be the next big issue. But the whole thing with Musk, this illegal takeover of our federal government agencies, that I can't believe he's still doing it. I mean, it's and the Republicans are like, oh, he'll fix it. It's like, come on, man. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is a takeover right in front of our eyes. It's a coup. And of course, people are going to be upset about that. What Scott said, I've been to 2 protests, in the last several weeks. And I missed several when I took a trip down to Florida to spring training to get away from it, get some nice weather and watch baseball. That's something that would take my mind off it. But in the background, we have a takeover. It's a hostile takeover is what it is. And that's what he does. That's his job. He's been doing that his whole life. He's a professional, vulture. He's a corporate vulture that comes in and does this routinely. I was on a national call about Doge yesterday, and there was like over 150 businesses, captains of industry on the call. And one of the guys knew Elon personally in the aerospace industry. And he said, man, this is nothing new. He does this stuff all the time. We have no idea what's going to happen. It's uncharted territory is what he said. Uncharted territory. A gentleman named Courtney Stad. And he says, what Elon is doing, he always does. This is what he does. And the fact that we would just accept it without a vote, without any kind of backing by the voting public, and that it took over on day one, and here it is, but it's a month, it's a 2 month and a half into his administration. He's still there, he's still doing it, and he has the backing of some of these people that that Trump has installed in these various positions of power. To me, that's incredulous. And Scott, I think you're right. I think it's gonna cause more and more people to become outraged and join these groups that are protesting and boycotting. I mean, the list of boycotts and marches and everything is a long list. You know, right now we're in the middle of the Amazon boycott, and I quit Amazon on March the 7th, and I feel good about it. You know, I put it on Facebook, and we got hundreds of, you know, thumbs up on that. You know, like, yeah, I did it too. So who knows where this goes? Maybe this makes us stronger. We can only hope, you know, that we get stronger by this. It's a great show, and we always love to have you on here, Troy. You know, we're kind of running a little bit long, but it's been a very interesting show.
Yeah, I just realized I have no idea how long the program normally is, but I want to take the quick opportunity to say what they're going to do is a very clear strategy. It's what they've been doing here in West Virginia since they started getting control in 2014, the Republicans, and they're going to they're going to make sure our services don't work. They're going to fire all the, admin and all of this to make sure that things stop delivering properly, whether it's the mail or Social Security or Medicare, right? They're going to say, see, it's broken. The public sector can't do anything correctly. And then they're going to say, we have to sell it into the private sector. Because the answer is always for them, the people who own the algorithms, just more algorithms. Healthcare is too expensive. We should just have more robots decide who lives or dies, which it hasn't been that long since they were all up in arms about the ACA was going to create death panels. But now they're like, oh, you know what? Actually, if it's a robot doing the death paneling, we're cool with that. That's efficiency, right? And so it's our duty, it's incumbent on us to make sure that people know when the first Social Security check is missed because they've cut the administration, when people can't get to the offices because they've fired all the people and they've closed down the office in Logan, when people can't get help on the line, some people are going to want to blame Social Security. And we have to make sure that they know that these people broke this system, and so they're doing it because they want to make sure that every cent in Social Security can be mismanaged by a Wall Street hedge fund manager, or can be put in Dogecoin or whatever the hell, that they can enrich themselves from it. And with that, thank you all.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm already getting, by the way, as president of the ARA, I'm already getting calls from our members about how long wait times and some cases no pickup time at Social Security phone lines this week. So, okay, everybody, take care of each other. It's late, but everything comes next. Thank you for joining Labor Beat. You can check out our podcast on podcast.enlightenradio.org, or you can go to www.enlightenradio.org, and there's a player on top there. Also at player.enlightenradio.org. Anyway, check out, we usually get the podcast up in a day, so this has been great. Thank you so much, Troy, and hope you run again. And, it's... the little engine, they're good. All right.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.